When I walked into my granddaughter's award ceremony with flowers in my hand, I thought I was going to sit in the front row. Instead, the usher looked at me and said, "Family seating is full." What he didn't know was that I was the one who raised her, and what happened next, no one in that auditorium was prepared for. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube. I woke up that morning before the sun had even considered rising. At my age, sleep comes and goes like an uninvited guest, but that day I didn't mind. I was too excited to stay in bed. My granddaughter, Lily, was receiving the Principal's Leadership Award at her school. They only gave it to one student each year, one child chosen out of hundreds, and this year it was her. I had laid my dress out the night before, a soft lavender one with small white buttons down the front. It wasn't new. I bought it 3 years ago for Easter service at First Baptist, and I only wore it twice. I pressed it carefully, even though my hands aren't as steady as they used to be. I want it to look proper, not flashy, just dignified. On the kitchen table sat a small bouquet of white carnations wrapped in clear cellophane. I had arranged them myself. Lily once told me carnations were old-fashioned but classy. I suppose that makes the both of us. Next to the flowers was a card, handmade. I'd spent 2 evenings working on it, cutting tiny paper stars and gluing them across the front. Inside, I wrote in my neatest handwriting, "I have watched you grow into the kind of young woman I always prayed you would become. I am proud of you in ways words cannot hold." I read it again that morning and felt my chest swell. I wasn't always meant to raise Lily. That wasn't the plan. Parents are supposed to do that. But when she was 3 and my son Daniel and his wife Marissa were both climbing their careers like ladders that had no top, I became the steady ground. Daycare pickups turned into overnight stays. Overnight stays turned into weeks of piano lessons, scraped knees, homework battles, and bedtime stories. I never complained, not once. When I left the house that morning, I locked the door slowly, making sure the handle caught. The air was crisp, carrying that clean smell of early spring. I drove myself, though Daniel had said, "Mom, we'll meet you there." I didn't want to be a burden. I never do. The school parking lot was already filling when I arrived. Parents in pressed suits and high heels walked briskly toward the entrance. I saw clusters of grandparents, too, holding phones ready for photos. It made me smile. I wasn't the only one. Inside, the auditorium buzzed with polite conversation and the shuffle of programs. A large banner hung across the stage, "Excellence in Leadership Ceremony." I felt my throat tighten. My Lily. Excellence. At the entrance to the seating area stood a young man in a navy blazer with a badge clipped to his pocket. He looked barely 20. He smiled automatically as people approached. "Good morning," he repeated to each group, gesturing toward the first several rows. I stepped forward when it was my turn. "Good morning," I said gently. "I'm here for Lily Thompson." He glanced at his clipboard. "Yes, ma'am. And which family are you with?" I blinked, confused by the wording. "I'm her grandmother." He scanned the page again. His finger moved down the list slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, still polite but distant. "Family seating is full." I didn't understand at first. "Oh, that's all right. I'm family." He gave a small, rehearsed smile. "Yes, ma'am, but the reserved section is at capacity. You'll need to sit in general seating." He gestured toward the back half of the auditorium. For a moment, I thought perhaps he was mistaken. "I believe there must be some confusion," I said softly. "Her parents are Daniel and Marissa Thompson. I'm her grandmother." He looked down once more, then back at me. His expression changed just slightly, not unkind, just final. Her parents have already checked in their reserved seats. The list only allows 4. 4. I felt something cold settle under my ribs. 4 seats. Daniel, Marissa, likely Marissa's parents who had moved into town just last year. I stood there, holding my carnations, the cellophane crinkling faintly in my grip. Is there perhaps an extra chair? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. I'm sorry, he repeated. You'll need to sit in the back. People behind me shifted impatiently, and in that moment I realized something that hurt far more than the words themselves. They had chosen who counted, and it wasn't me. I nodded slowly. I understand. I turned and walked toward the back rows, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Each step felt louder than the last. The back row was nearly full, too. I found a seat near the aisle, next to a woman I didn't know. She gave me a kind smile. "Who are you here for?" she asked cheerfully. "My granddaughter," I said, smoothing my dress over my knees. "She's receiving the leadership award." "Well, that's wonderful. You must be so proud." I swallowed. "Yes," I whispered, "I am." From where I sat, the stage looked farther away than it should have, and for the first time in years, I felt like a guest in a life I helped build. I sat there in that back row, holding my flowers like they were something fragile enough to shatter, and perhaps they were. Around me, families leaned toward one another, whispering and adjusting phone cameras. The air carried the faint scent of perfume and polished wood. On the stage, teachers shuffled papers behind a long table draped in navy cloth. The microphone gave a small squeal of feedback, and the crowd quieted. I scanned the front rows, though I told myself I wouldn't. It took only a moment to find them. Daniel sat straight-backed in a tailored gray suit, his arm resting across the back of Marissa's chair. Marissa wore a cream dress and had her hair pinned in that careful way that looks effortless but takes an hour to perfect. Beside them sat her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, both smiling as though this day had been carved from their own hard work. There they were, the 4 seats. Daniel didn't look back, not once. I told myself he probably assumed I was sitting somewhere close. Maybe he thought I preferred the aisle. Maybe he hadn't realized the limit. Maybe. When you love someone, you become very skilled at building excuses to protect your heart. The principal stepped up to the podium, a tall woman with silver hair and a voice trained by years of assemblies. "Good morning, families and honored guests. Today we celebrate leadership, resiliency, and academic excellence." Resilience. That word brushed against me like a knowing hand. As the ceremony began, students were called one by one for various recognitions. Applause rose and fell in gentle waves. Parents leaned forward when their child's name was announced, cameras lifted high. I clapped for every student, even those I didn't know. It felt right. When Lily's name was finally spoken, It rang through the auditorium with a clarity that made my chest ache. Recipient of the Principal's Leadership Award, Lily Thompson. The applause was louder this time, sustained, earned. She walked onto that stage with steady steps, her shoulders back, her dark hair falling neatly over them. She wore a simple navy dress and the small pearl necklace I had given her for her 15th birthday. She told me once she wore it when she needed courage. My hands began to tremble. The principal shook her hand and handed her a framed certificate. Then she stepped aside, gesturing toward the microphone. "And Lily has prepared a few words," the principal said warmly. Of course she had. That girl had been writing speeches in my kitchen since she was 8, standing on a dining chair, pretending it was a stage. Lily adjusted the microphone slightly. The room quieted. "Thank you, Principal Harris," she began, her voice clear but soft at the edges. "I'm honored to receive this award. Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about showing up every day, even when no one notices." I felt my breath hitch. Showing up. She continued, speaking about her teachers, about her classmates, about teamwork and perseverance. She thanked her parents for encouraging her education and supporting her goals. Daniel nodded proudly in the front row. Marissa dabbed at her eyes. I clapped gently, though something inside me had begun to prepare for disappointment. Children often forget the small hands that steadied them in the dark. It doesn't make them ungrateful. It just makes them young. Then Lily paused. It wasn't a dramatic pause. It was subtle. But I knew her well enough to recognize when she was choosing her next words carefully. "There's one more person I need to thank," she said. The auditorium settled deeper into silence. "I want to thank the person who raised me when my parents were building their careers, the person who made sure I never missed a recital, never went to bed without a story, never felt alone when the house was too quiet." My fingers tightened around the carnations. I stopped breathing. "My grandma," the word echoed. For a split second, there was confusion in the room, as though people were searching their programs for context. Then Lily lifted her gaze and began scanning the audience. "Grandma," she said again, louder this time, "I know you're here." Every head in that auditorium began to turn, and then, as if guided by some invisible thread, the spotlight shifted. It moved across the rows, slowly, until it sound me. I blinked against the sudden brightness. I heard a murmur ripple through the crowd. The woman beside me gasped softly. "There she is," Lily said, her voice trembling now, not with fear, but with emotion. "She's in the back." The word landed heavier than it should have. In the back. I saw Daniel twist in his seat, saw Marissa smile falter. The Whitakers leaned toward one another, whispering. I wouldn't be standing here without her. When my parents were too busy to come to school plays, she was there. When I struggled with math, she sat at the kitchen table until midnight helping me. When I doubted myself, she reminded me who I was. Tears blurred my vision. She is my example of leadership because she showed up every single day. The audience began to clap, slowly at first, then stronger. Lily looked directly at me. "Grandma, will you please come sit in the front with us, where you belong?" There it was, the invitation, the restoration. For a moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the floor. I had spent years staying quiet, staying gracious, staying in my place. But Lily was asking me to step out of it. The applause grew louder. Daniel stood up now, turning fully toward me. Our eyes met across the distance. In his expression, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Shame. And something else. Realization. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the armrest. The carnations crinkled again in my hand, and I walked down that long aisle as every pair of eyes followed me. Each step felt different from the ones that had carried me to the back row earlier. Those had been heavy. These were light. The walk from the back row to the front felt longer than it had any right to be. Applause filled the auditorium. Not the polite kind that fades quickly, but something fuller, warmer. I kept my eyes on Lily because if I looked anywhere else, I was afraid I might lose my courage. My heels sounded softer now against the floor, as if even the building understood this was not a march of shame, but something else entirely. When I reached the front row, Daniel stepped into the aisle. For a brief second, we simply looked at one another. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Words, I suppose, can be very small things when confronted with truth. "Mom," he whispered, barely audible beneath the clapping. I nodded once. I didn't trust myself to speak. Marissa shifted in her seat, rising halfway as if unsure whether to embrace me or step aside. In the end, she stepped aside. That at least was honest. Lily waited at the edge of the stage stairs. One of the teachers offered me a hand to help me up, but before I could take it, Lily hurried down and took both of mine instead. "I've got you, Grandma," she said. Her hands were warm and steady, stronger than I remembered. When I reached the stage, the applause softened into something tender. Lily guided me toward the microphone. I shook my head slightly, but she squeezed my fingers. "You don't have to say much," she murmured. "Just stand with me." So I did. I stood beside her as the principal returned to the podium, smiling in that composed way administrators do when something unexpected but beautiful unfolds. "Well," she said gently, "it seems leadership runs in the family." A few people laughed softly. Lily slipped her arm around my waist. I could feel her heart beat through the fabric of her dress. Fast, emotional, real. I leaned toward the microphone, not because I had planned to speak, but because something inside me refused to remain silent anymore. "I didn't know I had a speech," I began, my voice unsteady but clear enough. "But I suppose I've had many years to prepare one." A quiet ripple of warmth moved through the audience. I didn't raise Lily alone. Life doesn't work that way. But I did have the privilege of walking beside her when she needed someone steady. And if there's anything I've learned, it's that showing up matters more than being seen. I let that settle. "I am proud of you, Lily. Not for this award, but for your heart." I stepped back then, because that was enough. The auditorium erupted again, louder than before. Not just applause, something closer to understanding. When we left the stage, Lily didn't let go of my hand until we were both seated in the front row. Daniel had taken a seat on the aisle, leaving the chair beside him empty. For me. The Whitakers sat stiffly, their smiles thin. Marissa leaned toward me. We didn't realize the seating was limited," she said quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her. There was discomfort in her eyes, but also calculation. She was choosing her words carefully. "It's all right," I said calmly. "I found a seat." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Mom, I should have—" "Yes," I said gently. Not sharp, just truthful. "Yes, you should have." He swallowed. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Other students were honored, more speeches were given, but something fundamental had shifted. I felt it in the way people glanced toward us, in the subtle nods from strangers, in the way Lily's hand occasionally brushed against mine as if to reassure herself I was still there. When it ended, families flooded the stage for photographs. Daniel immediately pulled Lily into an embrace, Marissa joining seconds later. The Whitakers hovered close, offering congratulations. I stood a step back, holding my carnations. Then Lily turned, scanning the space until she found me again. "Grandma, don't move. You're in this picture." Daniel hesitated only a fraction before stepping aside to make room. A photographer waved us closer together. "Family photo," the woman called brightly. Family. The word felt different now. Lily stood between Daniel and me, her arms linked through ours. As the camera flashed, she leaned her head against my shoulder. "I meant every word," I replied. "I know." After the photos, people began to approach me, other parents, a teacher, even one of the school board members. "You must be very proud," they said. "You've raised a remarkable young woman. She spoke beautifully about you." Each comment was kind, genuine, and with each one I felt something inside me straighten. Not pride exactly, something steadier. Validation. Daniel remained quiet during most of it, observing, thinking. Finally, as the crowd thinned and Lily walked ahead with friends, Daniel touched my elbow. "Mom, can we talk? Outside?" I looked at him carefully. For years, I had accepted the small sidelines they placed me on, the quiet rearranging of importance, the unspoken understanding that I would always adjust. But today had drawn a line neither of us could ignore. "Yes," I said, "we can talk." We stepped into the cool afternoon air. The noise of the auditorium faded behind us, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and children laughing near the parking lot. Daniel faced me fully then, hands in his pockets like a boy waiting for judgment. "I didn't know about the seating limit until this morning. Marissa handled the RSVP. I assumed—" "You assumed I'd fit wherever there was space," I said softly. He flinched because he knew it was true. "I never meant for you to feel secondary," he said. I studied his face. My son, the boy I once held when he was afraid of thunderstorms. Intent and impact are very different things. "I have never needed to be first, but I will not be invisible." The wind lifted slightly between us, and for the first time in a very long time, Daniel truly listened. Daniel didn't interrupt me. That alone told me something had shifted. When he was younger, he used to rush to fill silence, to explain himself before fully understanding what he was explaining. But now he stood there, shoulders slightly rounded, eyes fixed on mine like a man who had just seen a mirror he didn't expect. "I never wanted you to feel invisible," he said again, softer this time. I believed him, and that was the complicated part. "Daniel," I replied gently, "invisibility doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from convenience." He inhaled sharply, but he didn't argue. "When Lily was little," I continued, "you and Marissa were building your careers. You asked me for help. I gave it freely, not because I wanted credit, but because she needed someone present. I was happy to be that." "You were more than that," he said quickly. "I was what she needed at the time," I corrected, not harshly, but somewhere along the way that role became expected, quiet, background. The word hung between us again, background. Daniel looked toward the parking lot where Lily stood, laughing with her friends, her award tucked under her arm. "I thought including the Whitakers up front was practical," he admitted. "They've been feeling left out since they moved in. Marissa wanted to make them feel welcome." "And making me feel welcome required nothing?" I asked, still calm. He closed his eyes briefly. That's not fair. No, I agreed, it isn't. The honesty of that seemed to disarm him more than anger would have. I guess I assumed you'd understand, he said. You've always understood. There it was, the quiet expectation of endless grace. I have understood many things in my life, but understanding doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Daniel's shoulders sank. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The afternoon sun warmed my face, but inside I felt steady, not fragile. Something about Lily's public acknowledgement had reinforced a truth I had almost forgotten. My presence mattered, whether others acknowledged it privately or not. Mom, Daniel said finally, I'm sorry. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't rushed. It sounded like something that had been sitting in his chest longer than he realized. I should have checked the list. I should have made sure you had a seat in the front, not because of appearances, but because you earned it. I studied him carefully. Apologies are delicate things. Some are offered to smooth discomfort, others to change something. I don't need a front row seat to prove my place in Lily's life, but I do need to know that you see it. I do, he said quickly, then more quietly, I do now. The words settled gently, like dust after a storm. Behind us, the auditorium doors opened, and Marissa stepped out. She hesitated when she saw us talking, then approached slowly. Is everything all right? She asked, her smile careful. Daniel glanced at me before answering. We're talking. Marissa nodded. About the seating? Yes, I said plainly. Her expression tightened just slightly. I didn't mean to exclude you, she said. The school only allowed 4 reserved spots. My parents were already in town. It felt simpler. Simpler for whom? I asked, not unkindly. She faltered. I suppose I didn't think it would matter so much, she admitted. That's the thing. It matters. Not for ego, not for pride, but because small gestures reveal larger truths. Marissa folded her arms, then quickly unfolded them again, as if realizing the posture seemed defensive. Lily adores you, she said. No one questions that. I'm not asking to be adored. I'm asking to be acknowledged. Daniel looked between us, clearly uncomfortable but no longer retreating. Marissa sighed. When Lily was younger, I leaned on you more than I realized. You made it possible for me to pursue my job without constant guilt. I'm grateful for that. Her voice softened slightly at the end. But gratitude fades gently, I said. Presence shouldn't. She swallowed. I see now how it looked, you sitting in the back. It wasn't about how it looked, it was about how it felt. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't tense, it was thoughtful. Lily's laughter drifted toward us on the breeze. She was showing her certificate to a group of classmates, animated and radiant. She chose you, Daniel said quietly. I shook my head. She honored the truth. That's different. He gave a faint, rueful smile. Marissa glanced toward Lily, then back at me. I don't want her growing up thinking family is divided. Then don't divide it, I said simply. The answer wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Family fractures rarely begin with explosive moments. They begin with small omissions. Over time, those omissions become patterns. Patterns become distance. Daniel stepped closer to me. From now on, you're included in everything, he said firmly. I raised an eyebrow gently. Inclusion isn't about announcements, it's about instinct. He nodded slowly, understanding. Lily began walking toward us then, her smile bright enough to outshine the afternoon. Are you all done being serious? She asked playfully as she reached us. Daniel forced a small laugh, something like that. Lily slipped her arm through mine. Grandma, we're all going to dinner to celebrate, and you're riding with us. There was no question in her voice, only certainty. I looked at Daniel and Marissa. They both nodded. Yes, Daniel said, you're riding with us. And for the first time that day, the invitation felt natural, not corrective, not performative, just right. As we walked toward the car together, Lily squeezed my arm. "I was scared you wouldn't come up," she whispered. "I was scared too," I admitted. She smiled. "You taught me to be brave." I looked at her, at the young woman she had become, and felt a quiet. The ride to the restaurant was quieter than usual, but not heavy. Lily sat in the back seat beside me, her award balanced carefully on her lap like something sacred. Daniel drove, his hands steady on the wheel, while Marissa scrolled through the photos on her phone, occasionally glancing back at us. "You should see this one," she said after a moment, turning her screen around. It was the picture from the stage, Lily in the center, Daniel on one side, me on the other. The three of us framed by the soft blur of applause behind us. I studied the image. For years, I had stood just outside the frame in so many moments: school pickups, birthday parties, parent-teacher conferences, where I waited in the hallway so I wouldn't confuse anyone about who was who. But in this picture, there was no confusion. "That's a good one," I said. "It's my favorite," Lily replied quickly. We pulled into the parking lot of a small Italian restaurant we'd gone to many times over the years. It wasn't fancy, but it carried memories in its walls. I remembered bringing Lily here after her third-grade spelling bee. She had misspelled necessary and cried into her breadsticks. I told her mistakes were just stepping stones wearing disguises. Inside, the hostess greeted Daniel by name. We were shown to a large round table near the window. The Whitakers were already seated, menus open, glasses of water sweating onto coasters. "There they are," Mrs. Whitaker exclaimed brightly, "our little star." Lily smiled politely and hugged them both. I took my seat, unsure for a split second where that seat would be, but Daniel pulled out the chair directly beside him. "Here, Mom." I sat. Dinner began with the usual clatter of silverware and overlapping conversations. Mr. Whitaker launched into a story about leadership seminars he had attended in the 80s. Marissa described how competitive the award selection process had been. Daniel ordered a bottle of wine. Through it all, Lily leaned toward me often, asking if I remembered her first science fair project, reminding me how I'd stayed up late helping her glue cardboard to poster board. "You did most of it," I teased gently. "You supervised," she corrected. At one point, Mrs. Whitaker cleared her throat. "That speech was expected," she said, her tone light but edged. Lily met her gaze calmly. It was honest. Silence flickered around the table. I reached for my water, giving the conversation room to settle. "We're all family," Mrs. Whitaker continued. "There's no need to single anyone out." Lily's posture straightened slightly. "I wasn't singling anyone out. I was thanking the person who was there." The words weren't cruel, they were precise. Daniel shifted in his seat. "Let's just enjoy dinner," he said, his voice firm but measured. And we did. But something had shifted in more than just seating arrangements. The dynamics were rearranging themselves quietly, like furniture moved while no one was looking. Halfway through the meal, Lily excused herself to the restroom. Marissa followed shortly after, saying she needed to make a quick phone call. That left Daniel, the Whitakers, and me at the table. Mr. Whitaker leaned back, studying me thoughtfully. "You've been very involved in Lily's upbringing," he said. "Yes," I answered simply. "It must have been difficult taking on that responsibility." I considered the question. "It was necessary," I said, "and necessary things rarely feel optional." He nodded slowly, perhaps understanding more than he let on. Daniel looked at me across the table. "Mom never hesitated," he said quietly. There was something different in his tone now, not defensive, not explanatory, just acknowledging. Mrs. Whitaker pursed her lips but didn't argue. When Lily and Marissa returned, dessert menus followed. Lily insisted we ordered tiramisu to share. "It's tradition," she said. As we passed plates and forks, I watched the way Daniel looked at his daughter. There was pride there, yes, but also something deeper, a recognition of the woman she was becoming, strong enough to speak truth in a room full of adults. After dinner, we stepped outside into the evening air. The sky had softened into shades of peach and lavender. Lily slipped her hand into mine again as we walked toward the cars. "Grandma," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." "Oh?" I asked. "When I go to college next year, would you consider moving closer to campus?" "That's a big decision," I said. "I know, but I want you close, not in the background." Daniel overheard the last part. He paused beside us. "We can talk about that. As a family." As a family. The words carried more weight now. That night, when I returned home, I placed the carnations in a vase by the window. I set Lily's handmade card, the one I had written for her, beside it. I hadn't given it to her yet. Somehow the day had been full enough without it. I sat down in my living room, the quiet settling around me like a familiar shawl. For years, I had accepted small sidelines because love often asks for humility, but humility should never require erasure. Lily had reminded me of that. And perhaps in her brave young voice, she had reminded her parents too. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion finally catching up with me. But it wasn't the heavy kind, it was the kind that follows resolution. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the back row grandma. I felt seen. The house felt different that night. Not physically. The same ticking clock in the hallway, the same faint hum of the refrigerator, but something inside me had shifted its position. I sat in my armchair longer than usual, replaying the day not with pain, but with clarity. There is a difference between being overlooked and being unimportant. For a long time, I had allowed the two to blur together. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. I knew it would. "Hi, Grandma," Lily's voice came through, soft and tired, but glowing. "Hi, my brave girl," I answered. She laughed gently. "You keep calling me that." "Because you are." There was a pause on the line, the kind that carries emotion rather than emptiness. "I didn't mean to make things awkward today," she said finally. "You didn't. You told the truth. Truth can feel sharp when it hasn't been spoken in a while." She exhaled slowly. "Dad's been quiet." "Quiet isn't always bad," I said. "Sometimes it means someone is thinking." Another pause. "I almost didn't say it. About you." My heart tightened. "Why?" "Because Mom told me not to make my speech too personal. She said to keep it professional, but I couldn't stand up there and pretend like you weren't the reason I knew how to lead." I closed my eyes, absorbing her words. Lily, I said carefully, you don't owe me public gratitude. Love isn't a debt. I know, she said quickly. It wasn't about owing you. It was about honoring you. Her voice steadied as she spoke, and I realized something important. She hadn't been impulsive on that stage. She had been deliberate. You honored yourself, too, I said, by speaking honestly. We talked for another 20 minutes about dinner, about her friends' reactions, about the comments she'd already received online from classmates who had posted clips of her speech. Apparently, someone had recorded it and it was already circulating through the school's social media pages. People keep calling you the back row grandma, she said, half amused, half protective. I chuckled softly. Well, I've been called worse. But they mean it kindly, she insisted. They're saying it like it's powerful. After we hung up, I sat in silence again, letting the phrase settle. The back row grandma. What a strange thing, how something meant to diminish can become something meaningful. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls from Daniel. That was unusual. I returned the call while standing in my kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil. Mom, he answered immediately. He sounded tired. Is everything all right? Yes, I wanted to talk more. I leaned against the counter. Go ahead. He watched the video of Lily's speech. Someone sent it to me last night. And? He hesitated. I didn't realize how much you were there. The words caught me off guard. I mean, I knew you helped, he continued quickly, but hearing her list those moments, the math homework, the recitals, the late nights, I was working so much back then. I thought providing was enough. You were doing what you thought was right, I said gently. But I missed things, important things. Regret has a particular sound to it. It's quieter than guilt. I can't go back, I told him. You can only decide what you do next. There was silence on the line, thoughtful and heavy. Marissa and I talked last night, he said. We both agree things need to change. In what way? We've relied on you without acknowledging you properly, not just yesterday, for years. I didn't rush to respond. Sometimes apologies need space to breathe. I never asked for acknowledgement, I said finally. I know, he replied. That's part of the problem. The kettle whistled softly. I turned off the stove. We want to do better, he said, not because Lily called us out, but because she was right. I appreciated that distinction. What does doing better look like? I asked. It means you're not an afterthought. It means we check in, we include you in decisions, especially big ones. Like college? I asked gently. He sighed. Yes, like college. The conversation shifted then to practical matters, campus visits, housing options, finances. For the first time, Daniel asked my opinion not as a courtesy, but as a contributor. When we hung up, I realized something subtle but profound. Yesterday hadn't just been about seating, it had been about visibility, and visibility changes dynamics. Later that afternoon, Marissa stopped by unannounced. She stood on my porch holding a small bakery box. I brought lemon squares, she said, as if that explained everything. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight stretching across the floor between us. For a few minutes, Marissa stayed longer than I expected that afternoon. We finished the lemon squares and moved from the kitchen table to the living room, where the late sunlight softened everything it touched. There's something about afternoon light that makes conversations feel less confrontational, more reflective. I don't want Lily growing up thinking women have to compete for importance, Marissa said quietly, tracing the rim of her teacup. I think I think I turned you into competition in my mind without realizing it. I listened carefully. It takes courage to admit something like that. I never competed with you, I said gently. You are her mother. That place is yours. She nodded. I know that logically, but emotionally, when she'd run to you first, when she'd call you from school before calling me, it stung. That surprised me less than it should have. She ran to whoever was closest, I said gently, and for a long time that was me, not because she loved you less, but because proximity creates habit. Marissa exhaled slowly. I wish I had understood that earlier. So do I replied honestly. We sat in silence again, but it wasn't the strained kind from the parking lot the day before. It felt more like the quiet after rain, when everything is damp but cleaner. Daniel suggested something, she said eventually. He thinks we should start having Sunday dinners again, like we used to, at your house. The suggestion stirred something warm inside me. I'd like that. Not as childcare, she added quickly, not as obligation, just family. Family. The word felt steadier now than it had in years. After she left, I walked through my home slowly, noticing details I had overlooked. The small height marks penciled onto the kitchen wall where I used to measure Lily's growth, the worn spot on the couch cushion where she used to curl up with her books. My house wasn't large, but it held decades of memory. Lily's question from the night before drifted back into my thoughts. Would I consider moving closer to her college next year? At my age, relocation isn't just a matter of packing boxes, it's a matter of identity. Roots grow deep over time. Still, I couldn't deny the quiet excitement the idea sparked. That evening, Daniel called again. Mom, we've been talking about something else, he began. That sounds serious, I teased gently. In a good way, he assured me. Lily's speech, it's getting attention. The school wants to feature it on their website, and they're asking if you'd be willing to do a short interview about your experience raising her. I nearly dropped the dish I was drying. An interview? Just a small one, he said quickly, about the role grandparents play in supporting families. I sat down at the kitchen table. For years, I had quietly accepted being the invisible scaffolding behind their success. Now suddenly, people wanted to hear from me. I don't need publicity, I said carefully. I know, Daniel replied, but it might help other families, other grandparents. That gave me pause. When you reach a certain age, you start thinking less about recognition and more about impact. Let me think about it, I said. Of course, he answered. After we hung up, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. Life moves forward whether we feel ready or not. The question is whether we step forward with it. 2 days later, Sunday arrived. At precisely 3 o'clock, Daniel's car pulled into my driveway. Lily jumped out before the engine fully stopped, running up the path like she had when she was little. I brought ingredients, she announced, holding up grocery bags. We're cooking together. Daniel and Marissa followed more slowly, carrying additional dishes. Inside my kitchen, something familiar and beautiful unfolded. Lily chopped vegetables while I supervised from the stove. Daniel set the table. Marissa mixed a salad at the counter. There was laughter, small disagreements about seasoning, a shared rhythm that felt less strained than before. At one point, Lily leaned against me lightly. This feels right, she said. I agree. During dinner, Daniel cleared his throat. I want to say something, he began. Lily looked up immediately. Marissa paused mid-bite. I've been thinking about how easy it is to assume people will always be there, he said slowly. Mom has always been there, and I took that for granted. He turned toward me. I'm sorry for the years I didn't say thank you properly. Emotion rose in my throat, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you for saying it now, I replied. Marissa reached across the table and touched my hand. We're learning, she said. A small smile curved my lips. So am I. Because the truth was, I had learned something too. Silence, even when born from grace, can sometimes teach others that we require nothing. After dinner, Lily insisted we take another photo, this time in my living room with the old clock visible in the background and the soft yellow lamp casting a gentle glow. When she looked at the picture afterward, she grinned. "No back row," she said. "No," I agreed. "No back row." Later that night, after they left, I sat alone once more, but the loneliness felt different. Not heavy, not sharp, just quiet. I realized something important. Dignity doesn't demand a spotlight, but it does deserve acknowledgement. And sometimes it takes the courage of the younger generation to remind the older one that their story still matters. I folded Lily's handmade card into an envelope, deciding I would give it to her next Sunday. Some words are better delivered slowly. The week after the ceremony passed with unexpected calm. I kept expecting tension to resurface, a misplaced comment, a forgotten promise, something that would reopen the wound from that day. But instead, small, intentional changes began to appear in our family dynamic. Daniel started calling twice a week instead of once, not to ask for help, but to ask how I was. It may sound simple, even insignificant, but for someone who had grown used to being contacted only when needed, those calls felt meaningful. "Mom," he said during one of them, "I scheduled a meeting with Lily's school counselor." "Oh?" I replied. "Not because something is wrong," he clarified quickly, "but because we want to stay involved, actively involved." I smiled to myself. "That's good," I said. "Involvement shouldn't happen only when problems arise." "I learned that from watching you," he admitted. His words lingered with me long after we hung up. Meanwhile, Marissa began texting me photos during the day, small updates about Lily's progress at school, random moments she found funny. At first, it felt unusual, almost formal, but gradually it became natural. One afternoon, Lily came over alone. She knocked on my door with a serious expression that didn't match her age. "Grandma," she said once I opened it, "can we talk?" "Of course," I replied, stepping aside. She walked straight to the couch and sat down, her fingers twisting together nervously. "I've been thinking about something." I sat across from her. "Tell me." "I don't want what happened at the ceremony to turn into a fight between everyone." My heart softened at her concern. "It already caused conversations," I said gently, "but conversations aren't fights." She looked at me carefully, trying to understand. "Mom told me she felt embarrassed that the seating issue became public. She said it wasn't her intention to hurt you." "I know," I replied. "But some of my friends said it looked like you were being treated unfairly." "Ah, public visibility changes private perceptions." "And how did that make you feel?" She hesitated. "Angry, a little, but also protective." "Protective of who?" "Of you." The simplicity of her answer moved me more than any apology ever could. "Lily," I said softly, "I don't need you to defend me. I need you to continue being honest." She nodded. "Do you think things will go back to normal?" she asked. I considered her question carefully. "Maybe not the old normal, but perhaps a better one." She tilted her head. "What's the difference?" "The old normal had silence around uncomfortable truths. The better normal talks about them." She smiled slightly at that. After a pause, she added, "Dad asked me yesterday why I chose to say everything in front of everyone." "And what did you tell him?" "That if I didn't say it publicly, people would assume things privately." I raised my eyebrows slightly. "Smart," I said. She grinned. "Grandma, I didn't mean to expose anyone. I just wanted you to feel seen." Her words wrapped around me gently. "You succeeded," I replied. Later that week, something unexpected happened. The school principal called me personally. "Mrs. Thompson," she began warmly, "we've received overwhelming feedback about Lily's speech. Parents and staff were deeply moved." I'm glad, I said politely. We would like to create a small panel discussion at our next parent engagement event. We want you to speak about the importance of intergenerational support. I was quiet for a moment. Why me? I asked. Because your story resonated, and because many grandparents are silently carrying similar responsibilities without recognition. I thought about it carefully. Speaking publicly wasn't something I had ever actively pursued. My life had been about doing, not announcing. But perhaps sharing my experience could help other families avoid the same misunderstandings. I'll consider it, I told her. After I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. Life had shifted, not because I demanded recognition, but because truth had surfaced. That Sunday, our family gathered again for dinner, this time without any tension hovering above the table. Daniel brought a small envelope with him. "Mom," he said after everyone had finished eating, "we opened something for you." I frowned slightly. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a document, ownership papers for a small apartment complex near Lily's future college campus. My eyes widened. "What is this?" "We purchased it," Daniel explained, "Marissa and I. It's an investment property, but we want one of the units reserved for you if you decide to move closer to Lily." I looked up at them slowly. "This is too much." "No," Marissa said firmly, "it's not repayment, it's preparation." Lily beamed beside me. "So you can be near me," she said excitedly. Emotion rose unexpectedly in my chest. They had turned words into action, not to erase the past, but to build something better for the future. I folded the papers carefully. "You didn't need to do this," I said softly. "We wanted to," Daniel replied. I looked at each of them, my son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter. The seating arrangement that once symbolized exclusion had transformed into something else entirely: inclusion. Intentional inclusion. And for the first time since that honor ceremony, I felt confident saying this: I was not in the back anymore. I was part of the foundation.